Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Welcome. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'd like to thank you for joining today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Why Adults with ADHD Abandon Medication and How to Improve Treatment Outcomes. ADHD medications, stimulants in particular, are first-line treatment for symptoms of ADHD. They are also some of the most effective treatments in medicine, and if properly fine-tuned, they have virtually no side effects. Yet many adults with ADHD take their prescribed medication inconsistently, or they stop taking it altogether. Some of the reasons for this poor follow-through have to do with the nature of ADHD itself. People forget to fill the next prescription. They never get back into treatment. They may also be reluctant to take ADHD medication because of persistent myths surrounding its safety and side effects. In today's webinar, we will go over strategies for overcoming some of the main obstacles to ensure more effective and consistent symptom management. These techniques make the difference between success and failure for the majority of people being treated with ADHD. And leading today's presentation, we are so pleased to welcome Dr. William Dodson. Dr. Dodson is a board-certified adult psychiatrist who has specialized in adults with ADHD for the last 25 years. In recognition of his clinical contributions to the field of ADHD, he was named a Life Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association in 2012. He was the recipient of the Maxwell J. Schleifer Award for Distinguished Service to Persons with Disabilities in 2006. Dr. Dodson is semi-retired and maintains a consultative practice in Greenwood Village, Colorado. Before I hand over the microphone to Dr. Dodson, I have just a few housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into our live webinar, you may download the slides now by clicking on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you are interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you will receive about an hour after the live broadcast wraps up. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, you can visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 396 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the certificate of attendance option. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for your family or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Finally, the sponsor of today's webinar is Play Attention. Play Attention, improve executive function and self-regulation. For more than 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed. Tufts University School of Medicine found Play Attention significantly improved attention, executive function, academic performance, and behavioral control of ADHD students. Your program will include a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your plan along the way. Home and professional programs available. Call 800-788-6786 or click the link on your screen to schedule your free one-on-one consultation. Learn more at playattention.com. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Dodson. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this important discussion on ADHD medication adherence.
Thank you, Annie. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Dr. Bill Dodson. We're here to talk about one of the biggest, but also unnoticed problems with diagnosing and treating ADHD. The technical term that you'll hear from your clinician is non-adherence. It's the fancified term that means people stopping treatment even though it's working very well. Almost everything we know about ADHD non-adherence comes from a single article, a single piece of research done by Nathan Capone almost 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago now. It was an extremely large study. 10,000 people's records were reviewed. 1,000 people were interviewed face to face. And Capone found things that even he was surprised. It was not things that they expected to find. This graph needs a little bit of explanation because from a distance, it looks like just one line. It's actually the number of prescriptions filled for what at the time were the most popular amphetamine product, the most popular methylphenidate product, and the most popular non-stimulant. And what you find is they're exactly the same. It doesn't matter what the brand is or the molecule. This is something that has to do with the very nature of ADHD. And what you'll see is that half of people do not fill the third prescription. And at the end of 9 months, only 13% of people are still filling prescriptions. This study actually was going to go 12 months, and they just stopped after 9 months because they already had their answer. The other disturbing thing was that 13% who had stuck with it were only filling 3 prescriptions per year. So adherence to treatment is just dreadful. To put it in perspective, when you look at the same sorts of statistics gotten in the same way for people who have paranoid schizophrenia, 54% of people are still taking medication at a year. So people who are psychotic are doing 3 times better than people with ADHD. So this makes it very difficult to try and figure out why things are doing so poorly. Especially when you look at the effect sizes of ADHD medications. In medicine, we're always very interested to know how well does this therapy work as compared to some other therapy. And one of the ways we do that, one of the better ways, is with a statistical calculation that's much more mathematics than I can do, called effect size. When you look at the effect size in research studies, it's 0.95. Just about everything in medicine comes in between 0.4 and 1.0. So in research studies where they just assign a medication and dose just randomly, you're still getting extremely good results. In the real world, where you get to try multiple molecules and really fine-tune the dose, you get an effect size that's in excess of 1.8. In other words, better than just about anything else in medicine. The other medications that are FDA approved for the treatment of ADHD, such as the alpha agonist, when you look at the people who respond to the medication, you get an effect size, again, much higher than anything else in medicine, 1.1 to 1.3. Atomoxetine or Strattera in children is less. It's 0.62. Atomoxetine doesn't work that well in adults, comes in at 0.44. But just again, to put it in perspective, the SSRI group, which is by far the most common group of medications prescribed for major depression and for most anxiety disorders, are in the same ballpark. So even the poorest medications in ADHD are the equal of other psychiatric medications. So they work dramatically well, but by the end of 9 months, the vast majority of people are no longer taking them. And the question is why? Turns out that the single biggest cause is that when you ask the patient, they said, I don't know why I was taking the medication in the first place. Many adolescents and children, the decision to treat is made by someone else, made by their parents. With a lot of adults, the impetus to start medication again comes from a spouse or a boss or something like that. The boss tells the adult, look, we really like you. You're a great guy. But unless you get your numbers up, you're not going to be with us in 6 months. So usually the decision for treatment is made by someone else, and usually in what's in the field called an exit interview. You've got to do something about your ADHD or we're not going to be together. But the person themselves did not seek consultation, did not want it, and also didn't see a reason for it. They say, I don't really have a problem that I see. Everybody else has a problem with me, but I don't see a problem. Many people then will doubt the diagnosis. They'll doubt that it exists, doubt that it's an actual verifiable condition. It's an excuse for poor performance or laziness or lack of motivation. And a lot of people just are unwilling to even try the medication. So as soon as the heat is off, they stop taking the medications. So for the unmotivated person, one of the things that's not done by most clinicians is to sit down and talk with them about what the meaning of medication really is. The fancified term for this is psychoeducation, but it's basically learning about what ADHD is, that it's a second nervous system. It's not really a disorder. And that the rules of their neurology are totally different from the other 90% of the population. And so you have to find out for each unique individual, what does it mean to be taking a medication? What does it mean to have a lifelong neurologic condition? And so the person has to be ready to accept that. And so just dragging them in there under threat is not enough. If the individual is still erecting barriers, and it's usually just one after another about why I shouldn't be here, back off. It's too early. They haven't had enough life experience. They haven't known what to look for. Wait until they do understand what the diagnosis is and what medication has to offer them. Many people are not diagnosed with ADHD because they're exceptionally clever people, and because they're also exceptionally bright. This is the work of Joe Horrigan. At the time he did this study, he was at Duke. And what he did was, it's a very simple study. Everybody who walked in got an IQ test, a Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. And that was plotted out against the age of diagnosis. And what you see is the people who come in and get diagnosed early are kids who don't have the IQ or have lots of learning disabilities, so that they don't find compensations for their ADHD deficits and impairments. People who do have that cleverness, the very high IQ, do find ways around it. The average IQ in Horrigan's study was 123, which is all the IQ necessary to go to a competitive university and get a doctoral degree. The general rule is that if somebody takes an IQ test, they have ADHD, but they're not on medication, you can add to that a deficit of 12 to 15 points more just because they weren't on medication. So now we're up in the 130s somewhere. This is one of the reasons why, since 2014, the average age of diagnosis of ADHD in the United States has been 31 years of age. People do find compensations, And usually it's a life success that overcomes those abilities to compensate and actually gets the person voluntarily to come in for treatment. Also, usually about the only thing that most people will recognize as being ADHD is a lack of academic performance. The school system is very good at giving us a report card every 6 weeks to tell us how we're doing as compared to other people the same age. Mostly, ADHD is discovered in two ways. One is the disruptive little boy who's obnoxious, and the teacher tells you, no, this kid has ADHD. For girls, it's usually found as a ancillary feature of educational testing. This is a kid who's not living up to their academic ability. They're doing testing to look for learning disabilities and find ADHD along with that. The fifth and sixth most common reasons for people stopping is that the dosing is not optimized. 2 times. One is that the dose is not high enough to control the symptoms. This was one of the things that was found in the MTA study and practically every other study out in the community, is that just about the only pattern that was seen in the MTA was that pediatricians raised the dose to the first sign of positive benefit and stopped. And they did not optimize the medication. And so consequently, the medications just didn't work that well. And so because they're expensive, they're difficult, they're a hassle, people just stop taking them. The other type is that the dose was way too high and they produce intolerable side effects. And this is not nearly as common as people think it is, but if it's happening to you, it's happening 100% of the time. So that finding the exact right molecule for you and the right dose is really the very first task that the doctor has to help you with after the diagnosis is made. Remember that if you took 100 people with ADHD and the doctor started with whatever dose he was feeling lucky with that day, 30% of people are either not going to get a benefit from whatever molecule the doctor chose, or is going to get intolerable side effects. So that's 1 out of every 3. If that happens, you need to check to see whether the person is an ultra low dose responder. That's about 6 to 8% of people who are already overdosed at the lowest dose available. Or they just need to be on the other molecule. When both molecules ended up being tried, we still had 15% of people who either couldn't tolerate or didn't respond to methylphenidate or amphetamine. So again, that's common. That's 1 out of every 7 people. And there's another podcast here on attitude about what to do when neither methylphenidate or amphetamine works. The other thing that's extremely common is that the ADHD stimulant gets blamed for things that just not part of what they do. And that usually happens when you add medications on top that are stimulating and produce a lot of side effects, but it's the ADHD medications that get blamed. By far the most common one is caffeine, but it also happens with nicotine, oral steroids, just about every diet medication, and every asthma medication taken by mouth. You can still have inhaled medications. This is the dose response curve, and I put it in here so that you can see the dose response. These are TOVA scores, computerized tests of attention span and impulse control. But what you see is that as the dose is increased, there's a nice straight line return to optimal performance where the person is indistinguishable from somebody who doesn't have ADHD, and they don't have any side effects other than a very mild loss of appetite that can be easily corrected. If you go beyond that, performance drops off very quickly, and it's on the right-hand side of the curve that we get side effects. So more is not better, and everyone must have their dose finely tuned to their response. There's no such thing as dosing it by weight. There are some practical obstacles to sticking with medication. In October 2019, the American Academy of Pediatrics brought out two separate reports. The first one was a practice guideline on the diagnosis and treatment of ADHD. It was 32 pages long, and in many ways it was kind of a victory lap, congratulating themselves on how well they were doing. The second volume was 49 pages long, almost 50% longer, and it was on all of the institutional barriers to doing the first report. One of the most common problems was finding a physician, a pediatrician in particular, who knew how to use these medications. 50% of pediatricians acknowledge they are not prepared to diagnose and treat ADHD. ADHD itself, once upon a time, the definition was a difficulty with sustained effort toward a goal. People with ADHD were able to start after a long period of procrastination, but when they lost interest, when it became boring, they would just fade away and they couldn't sustain that effort. And it requires a lot of effort because almost totally unnecessary drug restrictions from the DEA make it very difficult to get refills and to have the medication on hand. People complain about the cost because it's, again, those restrictions increase the cost dramatically. But when they talk to 1,000 people about all the different things that got in their way, out of the 51 reasons that were listed, cost was number 50. It did not play a significant role. In fact, it was only mentioned by 11% of people. A lot of it is that we have tremendously high hopes, not really expectations, but hopes that a pill is going to fix everything. This is an old cartoon out of the New Yorker magazine. I'm writing a prescription that will give you new freedom and a new happiness. You will not regret the past, nor will you wish to shut the door on it. You will comprehend the word serenity, and you will know peace. That is what most people hope these medications will do. And of course, they're disappointed. One of the biggest, in fact, this was impediment to continuing number 2, was what is called the antibiotic fantasy. The fantasy was that this was going to be like treating an infection, that you would have symptoms, you would start an antibiotic, you take it for a couple of weeks, you'd be cured, you can stop the antibiotic, and the infection would be gone forever. That doesn't happen. You do not get a new neurology after 2 weeks. ADHD is a lifetime disorder. It doesn't go away. And so it is a commitment to being able to use medication to get in the game on a level neurologic playing field, and then it's going to be necessary for the rest of your life. A lot of people will come into me and say, well, doc, I tried the medications back when I was a kid, and it didn't work for me. Immediately, I want to know, what measure did you use to make that determination? What told you that it wasn't working for you? And a lot of the time, it was that they still had ADHD at the end of the prescription. The other thing that happens in my practice is what we call a doorway question. As the family is leaving and going out the door, they turn and say, "Oh, by the way, is he going to have to take this medication for the rest of his life?" From bitter experience, I know that no matter how late I'm running, I have to turn the whole family back around and have them sit down, and we have to confront this belief, this hope that this is not a lifelong proposition. Now, they don't acknowledge that every other illness, with the exception of the infections, every other illness in medicine is a lifelong commitment to treatment. Once you get diabetes, you've got diabetes. Once you get heart disease, you've got heart disease. And you basically are trying to lead the best life you can in spite of it. But I know that if somebody asks that question, that's the last time I'm going to see them. So we have to sit down and discuss that right away. Surprisingly, number 3 was that the clinician had a bad attitude. They appeared to the family, and the appearance was accurate, that they didn't support being on medication. And the telltale signs of that was that the medication was only prescribed Monday through Friday, 7 to 3 in the afternoon. It was strictly for school. And it wasn't prescribed during the summer and all sorts of nonsense like that. These are also the clinicians that apologized for prescribing the most effective, helpful medication in all of medicine. "Well, Ms. Jones, I'm sorry, but we really need to put your child on Ritalin." No, I'm absolutely delighted that your kid has something that is so incredibly treatable and safe. These are the docs who okay drug holidays. When using the word holiday automatically tells you there's something wrong here. ADHD doesn't go away. The impairments of ADHD do not go away. If you look at the major impairments of ADHD that will kill you, accidents, drug abuse, that sort of thing, those things don't happen in school. They happen after school, evenings, weekends, holidays, summers. That's the time you need the medication the most. The other thing that will tip you off that your clinician doesn't know what he or she is doing is that they, too, believe that people outgrow ADHD. This is utter nonsense. If you could name another neurologic condition that went away with age, we might have something to go on here. But since there isn't one that goes away with age, you have to assume that ADHD is always going to be there. On your 18th birthday, you don't get a beautifully wrapped box and open it up and say, "Oh, just what I always wanted, a new genetic code." No, that doesn't happen. This is a commitment for a lifetime. You'll also have people that still believe in the old thing about ADHD medication stunting growth, and that stopping the medication will help find compensatory growth. I would have thought that was put to sleep a long time ago. So it's not just academics that get you in trouble. There's actually a new series of articles done by Russell Barkley where he looked at the effect of just having ADHD, nothing else, on life expectancy. If you have untreated ADHD, your life expectancy is 13 years less than it is for somebody else in your family who doesn't have ADHD. This is due almost entirely to the vastly increased rate of accidents and to the vastly increased rate of substance abuse. But 13 years is a lot of problems. But with it come literally everything else: poor education, unwanted pregnancies, coexisting disorders. ADHD rarely, if ever, occurs all by itself. So what do? I encourage people, rather than waiting for noncompliance, plan for it. For instance, virtually every adolescent who goes off to college stops their medication. They don't take it in their first semester, usually their whole first year. And an extraordinary number, more than half, end up flunking out their freshman year of college. Mostly because, well, they had too good a time, but mostly because they couldn't study, they couldn't get started on things. They very quickly got behind in their coursework and were hopelessly behind when final exams came. So what I suggest to people in the United States is that they stop taking their medication intentionally in the last semester of their senior year of high school. In the United States, that's a pretty wasted period of time. There's nothing in this world so worthless as a second semester senior. All their transcripts have been sent to colleges. They're waiting on their admission letters. And no one will ever see the grades of that last semester. In the EU, this is not doable because those last semester grades are very definitely a part of what determines each individual's future, their ability to go to college and things like that. But in the United States, go ahead and help the adolescents see what school is going to be like without their medication. Virtually always, they find that their grades do a disastrous dive. But at least you're not paying, the parents are not paying $30,000 to $45,000 for tuition, room, board, and things like that to find this out. The person is to see that really they do need their medication. You also need to help the adolescent acquire all the skills that they will need to live independently. And generally we say you need to start by the age of 15, helping the adolescent manage their money, do their own laundry, time management, and especially manage their own medication. Now, this does not mean that the parents are off scot-free. Well, he's 15 now, he's old enough to manage his own medication. No. You still have to be involved when, not if, when the person stops taking their medication and to bring that to their attention. So, successful clinicians, successful parents are going to make sure that they've chosen the very best medication and dose for each individual child with ADHD. If one of the parents always has ADHD as well, it's genetic. It's really helpful for the parent to be on medication so that they can be organized enough to organize the child. The successful clinician should never assume that any patient is compliant. We know for sure that 87% are not adherent. It's even more who do not comply, forget multiple doses and things like that. So for these folks, you need to write everything down because in the session, the identified patient will smile and nod, and you think that they're remembering everything that you're saying, and they're not listening to you in the slightest. They're just waiting for the moment when your lips stop moving. You have to be vigilant. You have to do pill counts. Get the bottle, count the number of pills, calculate exactly how compliant the person has actually been. Most clinicians, most parents will be aghast at how little the medication is actually being taken. It needs to be programmed into their phone, have pillbox timers, all sorts of things to help the individual remember to take their medication. And all the time, be expanding their knowledge about what ADHD is and how it affects people in every aspect of their life, not just academics, but with everything. So the bottom line here is people with ADHD are going to be non-compliant and non-adherent. You can absolutely depend upon it. So get in charge of it, get out in front of it, help your ADHD child or spouse do the things that are necessary for them to commit themselves to lifelong treatment. It's not easy. It's not easy for any diagnosis. It's especially difficult just due to the nature of ADHD. But without sticking with the medication, a person's going to fail in treatment. It's just that simple. So you need to get working on that right away. At this point, we'll hand it back to Annie and see if there are questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Dodson. And yes, indeed, we have just a few hundred questions. So I will launch right in. First, I'd just like to thank, again, Play Attention, our sponsor of today's webinar. And I'm going to start with a broad one. What does successful treatment look and feel like? What people are wondering, how do I know when I've got it right?
There are whole books written on this. So this is going to be a real quick answer. So I hope people don't feel I'm being either too shallow or too flippant with this. With the medications, I ask my patients a very simple question. And that is, I tell them I want them to rate their medication on a scale of 1 to 10. And I want them to give me the first number that pops into their head. People with ADHD tend to overthink things. And I said, rank your medication, with 1 being just god-awful, nothing but side effects, just awful experience, and 10 being the best you can imagine any medication ever being. Rank your medication. Anybody who answers 6 or below, experience tells us we can do much better than that. 7 is about the lowest score that is acceptable. And of course, we're hoping for 8, 9, 10. You can go through $5,000 worth of performance testing and things like that and come up with the same answer. So that's something you can do in a minute. The real treatment of ADHD, and I've done several podcasts on this, is accepting that ADHD treatment has 2 parts. The first one is learning that the ADHD nervous system is totally different from the neurotypical nervous system. The neurotypical nervous system works on the basis of importance and rewards. You do something because it's important. For people with ADHD, importance is nothing but a nag. It doesn't help them at all. They are able to get engaged and get access to their abilities when the task is interesting, novel, challenging, or competitive, or urgent. In those situations, they're able to get engaged, get access to their tremendous abilities, and be tremendously successful and have no impairments. This is one of the things that's so frustrating, is this swinging back and forth of performance in people with ADHD. So ADHD is actually a problem of engagement upon demand, as the situation demands. What the medications do, and especially the stimulants, is one thing, but it does it spectacularly well, and that is, once you are engaged, it keeps you from being distracted. So everybody needs both in order to function at the level of neurotypical people. One is the acceptance that the things that work for people who are neurotypical will not work for them, and that they have to learn a totally new nervous system and then give themselves a break by taking the medications. That's what a successful therapy is going to look like. And when somebody does achieve it, they are so smart, so creative, such wonderful problem solvers. They usually perform at a level much higher than neurotypical people do. So that's what I shoot for.
And to be clear, lots of questions here about the long-term physical and emotional possible side effects, impact of ADHD medication. There should be none, correct?
None.
There should be none.
These medications have been around a long time. Amphetamine was first synthesized in 1887. It was first used for ADHD in 1938, excuse me. It has been, these medications have been FDA approved for the treatment of ADHD since 1956. So we're talking about 70 years worth of experience. Actually, the very best data that we have that goes back the farthest is the use of these medications for narcolepsy, where people have taken these medications all day, every day for lifetimes, 70, 80 years. There's not been a single, not one, report of long-term problems. They're just not a problem, mostly because when you look at what these medications do, if the doctor knows what he's doing and adjusts the medication, is what you see is a return to normative functioning without side effects. The medications, at the right molecule, right dose, do not produce an artificial state. It's a return to normative functioning. So, again, some people are not going to really believe mountains of scientific data. So the thing that I find most compelling is that I have complete faith in the American Trial Lawyers Association and the Church of Scientology. If there was any detectable problem, they would have found it and you would have heard about it in ads on late night TV. But there isn't. These medications are extremely safe. And that to me is the best proof yet.
Mm-hmm. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but there is indeed no research indicating that use of stimulant medications would increase the risk of drug abuse, particularly in teenagers. Quite the opposite. Am I right?
Quite the opposite. The guys at Harvard have been studying this for 25 years. And also the group here in Denver, under the direction of Paul Riggs, have been looking at this for many, many years. And what they have shown is that up until age 17, the misuse and abuse of drugs is exactly the same whether you have ADHD or not, but that after 17, there is an explosion of drug use, abuse, and dependence in people with untreated ADHD, so that by the age of 27, 47% of people with untreated ADHD have been diagnosed with a substance use disorder. It's not that they have one and they haven't come to anybody's attention. They have been diagnosed by a clinician. In other words, about half. The lifetime risk is about 60%, close to 2/3. If, on the other hand, a person with ADHD gets on medication and stays on medication, their risk of developing a substance use disorder is almost exactly the same as someone who doesn't have ADHD, somewhere in the realm of about 11 to 13%. So literally all of our data, even the studies that found the worst problems, found that it had no effect. One way or another, didn't make it better, didn't make it worse. Most of the studies show a very clear protective effect. So it's this whole thing about, these are stimulants, they're going to be abused. Not really, no. Not by people with ADHD.
Mm-hmm. And so much frustration, completely justified and understood from individuals who, because these stimulants are controlled substances, they are, as one of our listeners said, they're forced to jump through flaming hoops every 30 days.
Every 30 days.
Is there any
no reason for it?
Okay.
Because nobody will expend political capital to change it. These medications started off as Schedule IV medications when they first came on the market. They didn't become controlled substances until 1978, 20 years later. And then they were made controlled substances almost by accident. It's not that they were having trouble with them. It's that we suddenly discovered methamphetamine and cocaine, and the DEA completely overreacted. But for the first 20 years, these medications were Schedule 4. You could phone in a whole year's worth, no problems. So no, there's no reason for these medications, especially for people with ADHD, to be regulated. One of the things that just about everybody listening knows from their own personal experience is that if the dose goes even a few milligrams too high, do either you or your child say, wow, let's do that again? No. People complain bitterly about how these medications make them feel. Does half of people not filling the third prescription, does that sound like an addicting and compelling drug? No. I mean, that's the whole idea behind this presentation. Is the problem is that we can't get people to stick with them, not that they're addicting. So no, there's no reason to do that, and everybody has to jump through flaming hoops for no reason.
It takes solace in knowing you're not alone, but the system needs to change. So we have one listener out there who's aged 65. She was diagnosed 18 months ago, and she's tried 4 medications since her diagnosis. None of them have worked without side effects. And the most common ones I'm seeing here today are related to sleep and appetite. Is her experience common? Would you expect to be, or maybe I should ask, how long should you expect it to take to find a combination that works for you? And is any level of side effect acceptable?
For somebody like this that has tried several, by far the most common reason is that they're an ultra low dose responding individual. About 6 to 8% of people, if you start them at the very lowest dose manufactured, is already overdosed. I put up here that dose response curve. I don't know if people can see it. I'm not sure what the participants are actually seeing. I hope they're not looking at me. But at any rate, it's that upside down V. And there is a point where you get optimal performance and no side effects other than a transient mild loss of appetite. So the answer is, when you find the right molecule at the right dose, you should get wonderful performance and virtually no side effects. There are people, again, when I said earlier, when you try methylphenidate and amphetamine, 15% of people are either not going to tolerate it or not going to get benefit from it. So there's a whole chain of things that you can do. You would think that something that happened to 1 out of every 7 people in the world, there would be a great deal in the literature about what to do about that, and there is precisely nothing at all. Annie, do you want me to run through real quickly what that is, or?
Oh, for those people who do not respond to.
Yeah, or we could do another podcast.
I think that could be a whole another topic.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll talk afterwards.
Perfect. Let's see. Okay. A big question for many is finding a practitioner who will guide you through the process of finding the right molecule, as you say, the right dosage. Maybe I could ask this a little bit of a different way. What are some of your biggest red flags that a clinician is not the right clinician to be treating someone's ADHD?
Well, we went through several of them. Usually what I call the wafting of palms, that as soon as you mention ADHD, the person goes, well, no, I'm not the guy to talk to, whatever. Usually it's the youngest newest member of the pediatric group that gets all the ADHD patients. Find somebody who likes ADHD, who loves treating it, who loves hitting a home run 90% of the time. That's who you want to see, somebody who's happy to be there. How do you find them? First thing to do is to go to your local support group meeting. CHAD, go to, chad.org, and they have a map, and you just put your cursor there, and they'll tell you the closest CHAD meeting. You can do the same thing with the Attention Deficit Disorder Association, which is the same thing for adults. They're found at add.org. Go to those meetings and talk with people. They're exactly like you. A year ago, they were looking for somebody who knew what they were doing. So get a list of names, people who know what they're doing, people who clearly do not. So that's one of the best places to start. Talk to your child's counselor at school. Ask them who gets good results, who doesn't. Whose kids do well, whose kids don't have side effects, things like that. But it's sort of like Angie's List or something like that. Get somebody where people have had real life experience and can recommend these people to you. Go to the Attitude website, because they have a section on the website of people who really enjoy ADHD, specialize in ADHD, and they're going to be a good start. It's somebody who wants to know. Remember that ADHD is consciously avoided in medical education. A long story about why that is, but it's not by accident, it's by intent. 93% of adult psychiatry residencies do not mention ADHD in 4 years of training. Half of pediatric residencies do not mention ADHD. So your clinician is going to graduate from an otherwise perfectly fine residency, functionally incompetent and illiterate in ADHD. So look around, talk around. If your pediatrician is not eager to help you, asking for a referral to somebody who is, especially since this is going to be a long-term thing. This is not a one-shot, one and done. You want somebody who's going to be there and stick with you all the way through.
Right. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but ideal to find someone who also understands the complexities of ADHD comorbidities.
Yes.
Because right. I mean, we know that complex ADHD is the norm, ADHD existing with other conditions. And quite a few people here listening today who have experienced, for example, their anxiety becoming exacerbated on some medications, or perhaps their body-focused repetitive behaviors. Is that something you see that a stimulant could that just another degree of awareness of those common comorbidities and the ability to adjust treatment plans accordingly is important?
Well, experience is important in anything. What I've found, I've lectured in every state in the country, so I know a lot of people. I've met a lot of people, especially in the past. People who have specialized in ADHD have ADHD themselves, and that's why they're there. They know that they've gotten terrible care. They know that their family has gotten terrible care, and so they're willing to devote 2,000 or 3,000 hours of personal inquiry and study into getting up to speed with ADHD. So they're going to know personally what this is all about. So, 70% of people with an ADHD nervous system are going to have another first-line major psychiatric condition. 57% will have 2 or more additional conditions. So Having additional conditions is the rule, not the exception. With the anxiety, that's something else going on. There's a very good study of studies with anxiety that shows that, in point of fact, they reviewed 25 studies. All 25 show that when ADHD stimulants are started in children with anxiety disorders, their anxiety disorders improve quite significantly. If the person is, if their quote anxiety is getting worse, it's probably because you're seeing a side effect of stimulation. And it also depends on what the person is defining as anxiety. When somebody comes in and says, "Doc, I'm anxious," first question I ask them is, "Tell me more about your baseless, apprehensive fear." In other words, I feel as if something awful is just about to happen. That's the definition of anxiety. And I would tell you that 9 times out of 10, I get this very quizzical look in the person's face. And I said, "Well, I never say anything about being afraid." I said, "Then let's get rid of that technical term and tell me what you experience. Don't give me technical terms and diagnoses. What do you experience?" And if I hear that I'm revved up, I can't sit through a TV show, I can't turn my brain and body off to go to sleep at night, I'm very impulsive, I'm very driven. So what you're describing is not anxiety, it's the hyperactive, hyperarousal component of ADHD. And that has a separate treatment. That's where the alpha agonists come in. But it's not anxiety. So again, having somebody that knows to distinguish what you're experiencing. Is this hyperarousal from ADHD? Is it anxiety, a baseless apprehensive fear?
Okay, very helpful. I may be foolish to try and squeeze in this question as our final one because it's a big one, but it's important. So maybe we can touch on it, and it's another whole webinar idea. And that is what I'm hearing from so many people who are over the age of 65, whose doctors have told them, carte blanche, you are too old to be taking stimulants. It's too dangerous for you.
Well, what the doctor is doing is treating their own anxiety. ADHD is the same, regardless of the age. It's the same medications, interesting enough, at the same doses. Little kids take the same medications and doses that adults do. Again, these are docs. If you ask them, how much training did you get with ADHD? If they're honest, they'll tell you none. They're afraid of what they don't know. And the problem is they'd really have to go searching for it to find it. But the only effect that these medications have on the cardiovascular system is that if the dose is too high, or you've added a stimulant on top of a finely tuned dose, it's going to increase the blood pressure and increase the heart rate. That's it. The FDA, bless their pointed little heads, forever and ever have been afraid that these medications are inherently cardiotoxic. They do awful things to the heart, and they have looked for that for 40 years. They've done 3 huge studies, total of 7.3 million people. And what they found is that that taking stimulant medications does not increase your cardiovascular risk at all. 0, nothing, bupkis. And that continues with adults. So what you have to do is show that the medication you're taking does not increase your blood pressure, does not increase your heart rate. And that therefore it's going to be absolutely safe. If the doc needs further treatment of his own anxiety, go to a cardiologist and get their blessing. Cardiologists know that these medications are not difficult, they're not dangerous, and that there is lots of research to support that.
Wow, clearing up a lot of misconceptions and misinformation here today. This has been incredibly helpful. Thank you so much, Dr. Dodson. And for those who are listening, please know you can share the replay of this webinar with your clinician. So we will follow up with that information shortly. But for now, I just want to extend my thanks again, Dr. Dodson, to you for leading this really compelling discussion. And for everyone who joined us, we hope you can join us again. We have a free webinar every week. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, you can visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 396 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the certificate of attendance option. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for your family or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. So thank you and have a wonderful day, everyone.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.